Good morning, good evening, and good day. Thank you so much for watching Attack Power Gaming. Today, we're checking out the multiple rocket launcher systems in Steel Division 2 and which is the best. If you enjoy this content, please hit that like button and subscribe. It's free to you and really helps the channel out quite a lot. Let's dive right in. So here we are with many of the rocket systems in Steel Division 2. This is not every single one, but it is every millimeter type. So this is every caliber of rocket that you can use in the game. It is not literally every single unit. I'm not going through each unit specifically. I'm actually just going to be examining which rocket type is the strongest. I will mention here and there when certain units are better than others objectively, just the way they're brought in. But for the most part, we're looking at the actual munitions and not the system that carries those munitions. So we have a whole spread here. We're going to start right over here. These two units. This is the 82 millimeter rocket units. There's a Katyusha here that you can only find it, I think, in two. I think there's only one division that has this one, and there's one other division that has a different version of this, but still 82 millimeter rocket. The Axis version down here. This one, there's a lot of versions of this. There's at least 4 or 5 divisions that have some sort of version of this 82 millimeter rocket. They come in different varieties and such. So this thing does 4 damage per rocket. It's firing at 12 rounds a minute. It's got a nice 5,300 meter range. So these are okay. They're really not good. They are too weak to do a lot of damage. Now the nice thing is you get a lot of rockets. So when you do these, this is good for kind of suppressing infantry and thing. You really should not depend on it for killing stuff consistently. For example, if you need to kill an AA Flak 41 with 9 health, this is not likely to kill it. Unfortunately, the spread is too wide and the damage is too low to really effectively wipe them out. Now, that doesn't mean it won't, and I'm not saying it is not effective at all at killing those kind of things, but this is probably a little bit more effective in just simply suppressing infantry in an off-map style thing to then push forward. But remember, again, it is not very strong. I don't strongly suggest using these usually. I don't see them used a lot, and again, that's not because they're bad. It's just that they're not extremely effective for the value. You're really not going to kill anything with them. You're simply going to suppress some stuff with them. You may kill a mortar or something with this, a lower health unit, but I would not depend on these for killing. Okay, our next one here is only in the American divisions, and again, there's a xylophone version of this, but basically we're looking at this T-34 rocket here. Okay, I'm actually going to zoom in a bit, help us out. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So we're looking at this 114 millimeter HE rocket. It does 5.7 damage. It has a nice 6 rounds per minute rate of fire. The xylophone is the same. This one, the Calliope, comes on a tank, which is nice, but not necessary per se. This is a solid rocket system. It does not see a lot of use. Again, it fills a similar role to the 82 millimeter rocket because these 100-esque millimeter rounds. So I'm thinking 105 millimeter artillery. That you have lots of that artillery as well. This falls in a really weird category where this caliber of shell doesn't do enough damage to consistently kill things, but it is bigger and more dangerous, generally speaking, than, of course, the 82s, which is the same caliber that your mortars have, your 82 millimeter mortar. So it's in this weird spot where it doesn't, most of the time it doesn't do enough to really wipe things out, but it is deadly on its own merit. So it falls in a weird spot where I don't find it to be effective enough to use, which is why you don't see many people use these sort of things. It's also 150 points. This one, for example, is very expensive, and you're not going to kill things consistently with this. That's the big issue. It's going to fire a good number of rockets, but it's just not going to kill things consistently. It'll suppress, it'll do all that kind of stuff, but there are way more effective weapons than this for actually killing targets that you are looking to kill. Continuing on in our size department, we get to the Katyusha here with 132 millimeter rockets. You get 16 of them here, and they fired 3 rounds per minute with 6.6 damage. These are useful. They are only 80 points, which is relatively cheap. The problem is, of course, supply. That's one thing to remember with all of these rocket things. The only ones that come with supply are the German ones down here, the Nebelwerfers. They're the only ones that actually come with supply. These Katyushas are, of course, their own vehicles, so they have to have supply brought in separately, and that's where the price really starts to add up, is when you have to add supply to these things. The Katyusha, if you bring them in twos, are very effective at killing things, AT weapons, AA guns, things of this nature, any sort of manned weapon on the ground. These can be very effective, especially in twos. In ones, they're not super effective unless you get quite close. So the thing is, the spread of the rockets is very much dependent on the range that you are at. If you are firing near that 7,000 meter range, you are probably not going to hit much. You're going to kill very little. Most of the rockets are going to go wide. If you really want to actually do damage with these, you got to get within that 3,000 to 4,000 meter range, and the spread becomes much tighter, and you have a much better chance of actually killing what you're aiming for. Two of these at a 4,000 meter range will very consistently kill most weapons, okay? Most AT, most AA, most infantry, those kind of things. It will do a fine job of killing the majority of those things when in twos. A singular one, it's a questionable consistency. It's not going to always kill them. And again, it's not that these are bad. They are very effective when used well, but there's a very specific role for Katyushas, okay? Yes, you have 7,000 meter range, so you can reach out to, say, maybe their artillery that's maybe a little too far, but at that maximum range, they're really not going to do the damage you need them to do. And that brings us to a very similar weapon on the Axis side here, the Nebelwerfer 41 150 millimeter rocket system. This weapon is really quite effective. It can be used really well, and it's the similar to the Katyusha, but the thing is, it gets up to that 150 millimeter, and this is like your big artillery now. So this is doing the same damage as your large Axis artillery and most of the larger allied artillery, the 150 millimeter stuff. This is doing the damage, 7.5 damage, 3 rounds per minute, 7,000 meter range again. These things can lay down some good fire. And again, though, it suffers the same issues as the Katyusha does. You need to make sure that you are at a range that is not maximum. Maximum range, these things do not function well. These are not meant to sit way back in your lines. None of these are. Let me be clear about that. None of this stuff is meant to sit way back in your lines. It's meant to be a little bit closer to the front, where it can get closer and reduce the size of that ring on which it's going to land shots. So you want to make sure that you're getting this a little bit closer to the front. This thing can kill artillery and such in a single volley if you're close enough. The damage that it lands is high enough to actually kill things pretty consistently, but again, 2 of them goes way further, and these are only 60 points. Now again, you bring them in with a 40-point supply, it's 100 points. You're looking at 2 of these, generally speaking, 200 points. It's oftentimes worth the investment. I enjoy the Nebelwerfers 150 mils personally. They're not like super powerful, but they do get the job done rather consistently in my experience. And I've seen a lot of players use these quite well. So I personally like to use these when they are available. Our next is kind of in the middle here, the 280 millimeter Werfrahmen. It's, as we can see here, it has the 280 millimeter shells. There's 12 on this one specifically. There are different kind of versions of this one specifically. It does 14 damage, so you can see big jump here. We're going, it is a little less than double, the 7.5. We have 14 damage here. It's only firing 1 round a minute. Now that's not like, that's including like reload time and stuff, so it doesn't actually shoot that slow. When it fires, it's it fires at a reasonable speed, similar to the Nebelwerfer, but understand the reload time is much more extreme on these bigger rocket systems. But you only have 2,200 meter range. This is very dangerous. So these are hard to use because of this range limitation. You're gonna need to be driving this around the front, getting up way close to the front lines to actually land these effectively. They are relatively accurate because their range is quite limited, so they don't have far to go. And that 14 damage, this is doing a lot of damage. These things can actually start killing tanks. So like heavier tanks, you can aim these at Panthers and T-30-45, Tigers, King Tigers, all that kind of stuff. A couple hits from this will kill tanks. So that is something to keep in mind. This level here is where you get to start doing that. These lower millimeter things, the Katyusha, even the Nebelwerfer 150 here, it's not really going to kill tanks for the most part. Yes, anything will eventually, but it's going to take at least 2 barrages, maybe 3. This will consistently kill a tank in 2 barrages if you're actually landing the shells. And if you get lucky, maybe even 1, depending on how your spread is. So a very dangerous little system here. And finally, we have the Katyusha 300mm and the Nebelwerfer 42 300mm. These two weapon systems are identical in terms of their output. The only difference is their actual ammunition. Okay, so we have 15 damage. We have a 4,550 meter range and a 2 round per minute. So these reload actually a little faster than the 280 Rohrflammen over here. And again, the Nebelwerfer is exactly the same in terms of damage and specs. These things are very deadly. They will erase stuff pretty consistently. This is one of the heaviest weapons in the game that you can bring it on the ground. The only thing that outfires these things is the Sturmtiger from the Hermann Göring division. There is no other ground unit that does more than this other than off map. Before someone tells me, yes, there's a 600mm Grand Carl thing that is big boom boom boomy boom booms. These things are the biggest things you can bring in and have sit on the field. This is the highest millimeter thing you can have sit on the field and blow stuff up. It is fun to use these. Now, 4,500 meter range is not super far again. That you're going to have this thing up on the field, but it basically functions as an off map that you can keep firing over and over again. If you can get it up closer even, it is going to get more accurate because you have this 4,500 meter range, and as you get tighter into that range, the spread of those rockets gets tighter and you do more specified damage. So these are very effective. They are expensive though. So you're up at this 135, 115 points. And don't forget again, you have to bring in ammo with these things. These things eat ammo alive. A normal 10,000 supply truck will probably only get 3 to 4 volleys with one of these things eating up its supply. So be aware of that. It eats up a lot of supply. You have to be prepared to keep these things running, and they take a long time to resupply. You know, a lot of times you'll see players fire half the rockets, so 3. You know, this fires in sets of 6. You know, 3 and 3, because all you really want is the suppression. And the thing is, if this thing lands a hit, like if this lands on top of something, it will kill it. I mean, it will generally delete any non-tank armored thing in a singular hit if it lands right on top of it. Usually it doesn't. You're going to have to take a few more shots at it. So these are quite strong. In terms of which is the strongest, I mean, obviously the 300mm are the strongest in terms of output damage. In terms of which is the best, I would still lean towards one of the Nebelwerfers down here. The reason being they come in with supply, which means you have to, you can, bring these in with supply and bring in a cart of supply, so you have tons and tons of supply to work with to keep these guys running. They're cheaper, straight up. These are kind of equivalent. Yes, this is a little bit weaker, but I view these as kind of equivalent weapon systems. This is 20 points less than this, and you're getting more damage output at the end of the day. This one is 20 points less than the Katyusha, so exact same weapon system, and of course it has to get hauled around, but you have to bring, it's not actually cheaper. I mean, I guess you could bring it in without the supply. If you just bring it in straight, it's cheaper, but you need the supply, for this too. So it's a wash. These smaller systems really are not super effective. I don't suggest the 82mm in any way. They don't really get the job done. And I don't see many people bringing these in the American division, more because of their price, and their actual effectiveness is quite limited because of their caliber. They're not doing a ton of damage. The Werframens are great, but they are 140 points, and you have to bring in supply with them because they are their own vehicle. So using rocket artillery can be very effective, but it's not meant for counter battering. Let me be clear about that as well. This is not for targeting the opponent's artillery. Yes, mortars maybe, because mortars are a little bit further front. You might be able to catch those out, and they're quite weak health-wise, so a single hit from most of these will kill them. But these are for hitting AA. All of these can be used for hitting AA and AT emplacements. These can be used for pinning down infantry very effectively and taking some kills out of them. These bigger ones can kill tanks quite effectively. If you're landing those shots and you're being smart with your aiming, these can be very effective at killing those heavy tanks. Use them as such. They can do the job. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe, and have a fantastic day.